I'm scared.
Chicago is buried in white. Evan Mercer, a brilliant but tired CEO, hustles his 6-year-old through Union Station's warming shelter. Through frosted glass, Leo spots a shivering woman eyeing the soup pot, clutching a stainless ladle engraved CAF 12. He offers his red scarf. Something in Evan breaks. If tech can root trucks, can it root warmth before the night takes her? Snow blotted out the skyline, turning Chicago into a moving wall of white. The SUV's wipers ticked a tired rhythm, and Evan Mercer watched the world narrow to 2 gray lanes of slush and a string of brake lights. He looked like control incarnate, the kind of man who turned chaos into models and models into decisions. Designer glasses, dark hair trimmed close at the sides, clean lines. Italian suit under a winter parka that still could not quiet the cold pressing against the glass. But inside, control had slipped. Sleep was a rumor, meals were meetings, and he could not remember the last night he had listened without a phone in his hand. In the back seat, Leo's boots tapped the rubber mat. 6 years old, small enough to curl into the corner, big enough to notice everything. He traced circles in the foggy window with a finger, then wrote a crooked L and watched it vanish. Evan caught the motion in the rearview mirror and forced a smile. "Big snow, buddy," he said. "It sounds like the ocean," Leo answered. "Are we going to the train place?" "Union Station," Evan said. "Warming shelter tonight. Just dropping supplies." The dashboard chimed with an incoming call. "Ops wants you," his driver said, eyes forward. Evan thumbed accept and layered a calm voice over the static. "Yes, I saw the traffic drift. Reroute the vans down Ogden. Flag the bridge cameras." He listened, made 3 decisions in 30 seconds, and felt that old current of purpose. Luminarch AI would keep grocery convoys moving. Emergency generators, tracked. Heat maps, updating. A city of signals that obeyed when he spoke. "Dad," Leo said softly, "do we have to hurry?" "We always hurry," Evan almost said. He stopped himself. "Why?" Leo's gaze stayed on the fogged glass. "The flakes look like they're trying to land." The driver eased around a jackknifed pickup. A gust shoved the SUV, and for a heartbeat, Evan saw the edge of the world. A pale drop into nothing. The fear came as a clean spike, then dissolved. He was used to risk, but not to little voices reminding him he had more to protect than market share. He ended the call. "We'll go inside together," he told Leo. 10 minutes, then home." "Deal?" "Deal," Leo said, and his smile brightened the dim cabin. On his lap lay a red wool scarf, the one he refused to leave in the closet because it felt like brave. Evan glanced at his watch. The metal was cold against his wrist. He remembered his mother's kitchen on the south side, a winter where the boiler died and the oven door stayed open all night, the room smelling like bread and metal and resolve. He remembered a hand slipping a ladle back into a pot and a voice saying, "Taste first, then add salt." Work had buried that voice under contracts and projections. Tonight it surfaced like a match struck in the dark. They crept beneath the station's stone arches. A line of bundled figures hugged the wall, shoulders hunched against the wind. Yellow light seamed the glass doors. A city worker waved them toward a side entrance where donations were stacked. Blankets, batteries, gallon jugs of water. The air had that mix of mop soap and soup steam that means people are trying. Evan zipped Leo's parka to his chin and took his hand. "Ready?" Leo nodded. His eyes were the same clear blue as his father's, but softer at the edges, a winter sky when the storm pauses. The vestibule swallowed them. Heat met them like a hand on a fevered forehead. Voices rang against tiled walls, urgent and kind. On a folding table, volunteers packed paper cups with bread rolls. Farther in, a stock pot threw up a fragrant cloud. A woman in a reflective vest ladled soup, wrist steady, face tired. The steel glinted under fluorescent lights. Leo tugged Evan's sleeve. "Look." Evan followed his gaze. The ladle's handle caught the light, a line of letters scratched into it by years of service. He leaned closer and read them without meaning to, the way you read your own name when you see it anywhere. Kiev 12. The engraving was shallow, almost shy, but it held. He felt the oddest sense of recognition, like a door in an old hallway nudging open. The volunteer looked up. "You from Luminark?" she asked. "Yes," Evan said. "We brought power banks and thermal blankets." "Good," she said. "Tonight will hurt." He pressed his lips together. His city was a spreadsheet and a storm, both true, neither enough. He squeezed Leo's hand and Leo squeezed back. The boy's scarf lay coiled over his arm, a small red thing in a room of gray. "Dad," Leo whispered. "Can we stay longer?" Evan started to answer as he always did. Then he saw the line at the door shift as a gust slid in and a woman hesitate on the threshold, thin coat shaking, eyes fixed on the soup as if heat could be looked into being. The wind pulled at the door like a hungry thing. "We can stay," he said. "We can do more than stay." Somewhere inside the station, a clock chimed the quarter hour. Avon's phone buzzed again. He let it buzz. He lifted his head and felt the night take a small step back. The heavy doors of Union Station groaned against the wind. Inside, warmth trembled just beyond reach. Steam rising from soup pots, breath fogging in the cold gaps near the doors, voices blending in a low hum of exhaustion and relief. Volunteers in the mismatched gloves moved quickly, filling cups, handing out blankets, murmuring small encouragements like, "You're safe now," and "Sit near the heater, ma'am." Evan guided Leo through the crowd, his polished shoes slipping slightly on melted snow. The contrast felt almost surreal. A man worth millions, threading between sleeping bags and cardboard mats. His phone buzzed again. 3 missed calls from the office, but he silenced it. For once, the algorithms could wait. He stopped near a long folding table where volunteers ladled soup into styrofoam cups. The scent, rich broth, onions, carrots, cut through the metallic chill of the air. Leo's nose wrinkled. "Smells like Grandma's kitchen," he said. Evan smiled faintly. "Yeah, it does." At that moment, a woman with a kind face and frostbitten cheeks slid a cup toward him. "Sir, would your boy like some soup?" she asked. Before Evan could respond, Leo nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." He cupped his small hands around the steaming cup and took a sip, eyes brightening. Then, as Evan thanked the volunteer, Leo's gaze drifted toward the frosted glass doors that led to the outside plaza. Beyond the condensation, shapes moved. People huddled against the wall, some sitting on bundled coats, others standing too weak to move. A city bus idled at the curb, headlights piercing the curtain of snow, and there, just to the right of the door, stood a woman, mid-50s maybe. Her thin hair clung to her face in wet strands, and her gloveless hands clutched a worn tote bag. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even moving, just staring at the pot of soup through the glass like a child staring at a bakery window. Leo tilted his head. "Dad," he whispered. "Why is she just standing there?" Evan followed his son's gaze but didn't fully register it. He was already halfway into a conversation with his operations manager through his earpiece. "Yes, reroute the drone shipments from Milwaukee. No, don't wait for my approval. Just do it. We'll fix the optimization later." His tone was sharp, efficient, automatic. Leo tugged his sleeve again. "Dad, she looks really cold." "Leo, stay close, okay? I just need 2 minutes." The boy frowned, staring through the foggy glass. The woman's shoulders were shaking. A gust of wind caught her tote bag, scattering a few scraps of paper across the ground, but she was too weak to chase them. One page stuck to the glass door. An old job posting for a cafeteria cook, the ink half smudged by snow. Leo looked at the soup table, then at the volunteer who was wiping her ladle. "Can I have another cup?" he asked. The volunteer smiled, assuming it was for himself. "Sure, sweetheart." She filled another cup and handed him a roll of bread. Leo took both carefully, balancing them in his mittened hands. Then, without another word, he walked toward the door. "Leo?" Evan's voice carried, but the boy had already slipped through the crowd. Outside, the wind hit like a wall. Leo's breath came out in white bursts. He stepped up to the woman, who flinched in surprise. "Hi," he said softly. "You look cold." The woman blinked, as if unsure what she was seeing. Her voice cracked. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't be out here." Leo held out the soup and the roll. "It's okay. There's more inside." Her eyes filled instantly. She tried to steady her hands, but they trembled too much to hold the cup. He smiled, placed it carefully in her palms, then unwound the red wool scarf from his neck. "This helps," he said. "My grandma made it." She pressed the fabric to her face, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're an angel." Inside, Evan turned from the table and froze. His son's chair was empty. "Leo!" His voice rose over the noise. The volunteer pointed toward the doors. "He went outside!" Evan's pulse spiked. He pushed through the crowd and burst into the storm, snow clawing at his suit. "Leo!" Then he saw them, his son kneeling beside the woman, holding her trembling hand as she tried to sip from the cup, the red scarf wrapped around her shoulders like a lifeline. For a moment, the scene locked in place, the swirling snow, the boy's earnest face, the woman's tears. Something inside Evan cracked open, raw and unfamiliar. He didn't speak right away. He just knelt down beside them, the freezing wind stinging his cheeks. The woman looked up at him, startled, her voice barely audible. "He's kind. You raised a kind one." Evan exhaled, nodding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He did that all on his own." The woman managed a faint smile. "Sometimes. The little ones remember what we forget." He looked at Leo, who was shivering now but still smiling. And for the first time in years, Evan felt something stronger than accomplishment. Something close to grace. The snow whipped harder, lashing the plaza in erratic bursts. Evan's breath came in sharp clouds as he steadied his son's shoulders. "Leo, inside. Now," he said, though his voice trembled more from emotion than cold. But Leo didn't move right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman beside him. "Dad, she's really cold," he whispered. "Can we help her?" Evan looked down at the woman. Her cheeks mottled from frostbite, her lips blue, her coat barely more than a threadbare layer of wool. She was clutching the half-empty soup cup like a treasure, trembling so violently the broth rippled against the rim. Her tote bag had fallen open, spilling a few faded receipts, a crushed photo of a younger woman in a cafeteria apron, and something metallic that glinted faintly under the snow. Evan crouched, brushing the snow aside to pick it up. It was a stainless steel soup ladle, heavy despite the cold, its handle engraved with faint letters. Calf 12. The etching was worn, but still legible, the kind of mark that meant something once. The woman's eyes widened. "Please," she said, reaching for it, panic flickering across her face. "That's all I've got left." He placed it carefully back into her trembling hands. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," she murmured. "It was from my kitchen, the one they closed." Evan hesitated, feeling the wind shove at his coat, yet something held him there. "Your kitchen?" She nodded faintly. "Cafeteria 12. School district job. 12 years on the line, feeding kids who sometimes didn't have dinner at home." Her voice cracked. Then the cuts came. They said machines could track portions better, save labor costs. She gave a brittle laugh. "Guess the machines don't need heat." Leo tugged on Evan's sleeve. "Dad." She made food for kids. Evan's throat tightened. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ruth," she said almost shyly. "Ruth Callahan." He glanced at the ladle again. "You kept it all this time?" Her eyes shimmered. "Couldn't let it go. Figured maybe someday I'd cook again. But these days, the kitchen's the street, and the pot's whatever I can borrow." The words hit harder than the cold. Evan's company, Luminarch AI, had designed routing systems to optimize food distribution for corporate clients, but in that moment, all his logistics models felt sterile, lines of code mapping hunger, not healing it. He took off his gloves and rubbed his numb hands together. "Let's get you inside, Ruth." She shook her head weakly. "I can't. The line's too long. They told me the shelter's full." Evan looked toward the glass doors. Through the condensation, he could see the packed lobby, people huddled on benches, volunteers rushing back and forth. The air inside looked warm but overburdened, the kind of warmth that could only stretch so far. Leo reached for Ruth's hand. "You can have my seat," he said. Evan blinked. "Leo?" "It's okay, Dad," the boy insisted. "We can wait outside. She needs it more." Ruth let out a shaky laugh that turned into a cough. "You're some kind of little saint, aren't you?" Leo just shrugged, smiling. "Grandma said when you're warm, share it." Evan's chest ached at the memory. His late mother, her words almost identical, spoken years ago on a night just like this one. He rose, scanning the area. The volunteers were overwhelmed. A few policemen were trying to redirect people to nearby churches. But every shelter in the district was likely at capacity. He reached for his phone, instinctively about to call his operations team, then stopped. What was he going to say? Deploy drones? Open another spreadsheet? None of it would change the fact that right here, in front of him, a woman was freezing while his algorithm sat in a server room humming about efficiency. He crouched again. "Ruth, can I get you a ride to a hospital or a church? Somewhere warm?" She shook her head. "Buses aren't running. I'll be fine. Just needed to rest." Leo frowned. "You're not fine." Evan exhaled slowly. "You're right, Leo." He slipped off his heavy outer coat and draped it over Ruth's shoulders. She tried to protest, but he cut her off gently. "You can give it back later," he said. "Deal?" She smiled faintly. "You talk like someone who doesn't know how cold it gets out here." He met her eyes, and something shifted in his voice. "Maybe I used to." For a moment they sat in silence, just the hiss of wind through steel columns and the hum of an idling bus. Then Ruth whispered, "You know, the ladle was my favorite. Every kid wanted extra soup, and I used to tell them, 'You only get seconds if you say something kind first.' They thought I was joking, but I meant it." Leo grinned. "Then I'd get seconds every day." Evan smiled despite the ache in his chest. "Yeah, kiddo, you would." As another gust whipped snow across the plaza, he stood, helping Ruth up. "Come on, we'll figure something out." Ruth hesitated, clutching her ladle and the scarf. "You don't have to." "I know," Evan said quietly, "but maybe I need to." Inside, the station lights glowed warmer than before, or maybe it was just the feeling in his chest. He took Leo's hand and guided Ruth through the door. Behind them, the snow kept falling. Soft, relentless, and somehow forgiving. Inside the station, the heat hit them like a soft wall, heavy, humid, full of breath and soup steam. Evan led Ruth and Leo toward a corner near the supply tables. Ruth's legs trembled, her boots squeaking on the tile. She sank onto a folding chair, still clutching the ladle and Leo's red scarf like they were lifelines. A volunteer noticed her, rushed over with a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "She needs warm fluids," the volunteer said, glancing up at Evan. "She's close to frostbite." Evan nodded, his mind already splitting in two, the part of him that wanted to fix things instantly, and the part that knew human need didn't obey speed or structure. "Can you get her some tea?" he asked. The volunteer hurried off and Evan crouched down in front of Ruth. "You're safe now," he said quietly. She gave a faint laugh. "Safe's a big word. But I'm sitting, and that's a start." Leo leaned close. "Do you have somewhere to go when the storm ends?" Ruth hesitated. "There was a women's shelter on West Adams, but they filled up before noon. I got in the line too late." Evan looked around. The station was packed shoulder to shoulder, people huddled under emergency blankets, kids curled up in corners. He noticed how volunteers moved with rehearsed compassion, always short on supplies but never on patience. His chest tightened. "My company helps manage logistics," he murmured more to himself than anyone. "We can track traffic, power grids, supply chains, but not this." Ruth's head tilted. "You work with computers?" "Yeah," Leo said proudly. "My dad builds robots that help people." Evan smiled weakly. Not the right people, it seems. The volunteer returned with a cup of tea and handed it to Ruth. Her hands shook as she held it near her face. "You'd be surprised what helps," she said softly. "Sometimes just listening does more than any system." Evan nodded slowly. "You sound like my mom used to." Ruth looked up. "She teach you about food too?" "She taught me that warmth isn't measured in degrees," he said, voice catching slightly. "It's in how long someone stays after you've shared it." She smiled faintly. "Smart woman." He exhaled, watching steam drift between them. She was. A few minutes later, Ruth's breathing steadied. Color began to return to her cheeks. Leo sat cross-legged beside her, nibbling a piece of bread, eyes darting curiously between the volunteers and his dad. "Can we stay until everyone gets soup?" he asked. Evan hesitated. "It'll take hours." Leo shrugged. "Then we'll help." Ruth chuckled softly. "He's got your tone." Evan couldn't help smiling. "He's got my mother's heart, I think." The wind howled against the glass again, a reminder that the storm wasn't relenting. Outside, Chicago was a white blur of danger. Inside, the room flickered with life. Exhausted, imperfect, but human. Evan stood and walked to the supply table, rolling up his sleeves. "What can I do?" he asked a volunteer. The man blinked. "You serious?" "Yes, I'm faster than I look." The volunteer grinned, handing him a ladle. "Then start here, boss." Evan took it, feeling its weight, its purpose. He filled a cup, passed it to a shivering man with a quiet, "Here you go." It was small, but it grounded him. Each scoop an action that couldn't be undone by data or distance. Over the next hour, he worked beside Ruth, who had joined in despite the chill. She moved with the instinct of someone who'd spent decades behind cafeteria counters, her motions precise, rhythmic. "Keep the soup thick," she murmured. "Thick means it stays warm longer." Evan watched her ladle move, the engraved A Calf 12, catching the light. "You still remember all the tricks." "Hard to forget what keeps people alive," she replied. Leo's voice piped up. "Dad, look." He held up a crayon drawing one of the shelter kids had made, stick figures around a giant pot of soup. A heart floating above it. She said, "It's the soup that saves people." Evan swallowed hard. She's right. For the first time that night, he felt the noise of his own mind quiet. No meetings, no shareholders, just the steady rhythm of serving, the soft hum of a gratitude filling the gaps. When Ruthie leaned against the table to rest, Evan turned to her. "You shouldn't be out here tomorrow. Let me get you a room somewhere." She shook her head. "You've done enough." "Not nearly," he said. "I can't walk away knowing you'll be back on the street." She looked at him with a strange mix of pride and weariness. "Don't pity me, Mr. Mercer. You can't program kindness. You just do it, then do it again." He paused, humbled. "Then teach me," he said. "Show me what I've missed." She smiled faintly, tapping the ladle against the pot. "Start with soup. Work your way up from there." Behind them, Leo yawned and leaned against his father's leg. Evan brushed the boy's hair back and looked around the shelter. The flicker of lanterns, the quiet laughter, the smell of soup filling cracks that heat couldn't reach. Something inside him settled. Tomorrow, he thought, this can't end. But for tonight, he kept ladling. By dawn, the station lights dimmed to a softer hue, and the storm outside had only thickened. Snow piled against the glass doors in uneven drifts. Evan hadn't realized how long he'd been standing until the ache reached his shoulders. Around him, the shelter had grown quieter. People asleep on mats, volunteers slumped on chairs, empty soup cups stacked in tired pyramids. Ruth sat by one of the portable heaters, sipping what was left of her tea. Her cheeks were less pale now, but her eyes held that faraway look of someone balancing gratitude and shame in equal measure. Leo had fallen asleep across her lap, one small hand curled around the end of her scarf. The sight made something stir deep inside Evan, something he hadn't felt in years. He lowered himself onto the chair beside her. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ruth looked puzzled. "For what? You and your boy saved me." He shook his head. "No. You reminded me why any of this should matter." Her lips twitched into a weary smile. "You sound like you've been missing a reason." Evan rubbed his eyes behind his glasses. "I've been missing balance. Everything I build, every product, it's supposed to make life easier. But easy isn't always right, is it?" Ruth chuckled faintly. "No, sir. Sometimes the hard way keeps us human." She lifted her ladle, turning it in her hands like a relic. "I used to think I'd never cook again. That losing the job was God's way of telling me to stop pretending I mattered." Evan frowned. "Who told you that?" She glanced down. "A supervisor, once. Said machines don't get tired, don't get sick. Said I was lucky they let me clean up my own kitchen before the door shut for good." Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, broken only by the muffled howl of wind against the windows. Evan clenched his jaw. "You deserved better than that." Ruth's voice softened. "We all did. But the world spins faster now, doesn't it? I just couldn't keep up." He nodded slowly. "Neither could I." She tilted her head. "You? You're the one in the fancy coat and watch. You've got the kind of job people dream of." Evan looked down at his hands, the veins visible under the harsh light. "Sometimes success just means you outran the noise long enough to realize you can't hear anyone else anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ruth sighed. "Your little boy. He's got more heart than most grown men I've met. Don't let him lose that." "I won't," Evan said softly. "He keeps me honest." Leo stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, is it morning?" "Almost," Evan said, brushing snowflakes from the boy's hair. Leo blinked sleepily at Ruth. "Did you sleep okay?" She smiled, her voice cracking just a little. "I think I dreamed of warm kitchens again." He grinned. "Then it's working." Evan chuckled, standing. "I'm going to get us all some breakfast." As he walked toward the vending machines near the far wall, his phone vibrated again. The screen lit up with his COO's name. Trent Calloway. He hesitated, then answered. "Evan," Trent said briskly. "You missed the board call. Investors are nervous. The stock dipped overnight. We need a statement about the weather delays." "Trent," Evan interrupted, voice steady. "Take a deep breath." There was a pause. "Sir?" "I'm aware of the numbers," Evan said. "Right now, I'm looking at a different kind of delay. Human kind." Trent sighed. "Evan, with respect, our logistics clients don't care about shelters. They care about cold chain efficiency." Evan stared across the crowded station. Ruth's ladle glinted faintly in the weak light. Leo was showing her a crayon drawing he'd made on the back of a food receipt. A steaming bowl, hearts floating above it. "Maybe it's time they did care," Evan said. "Call me when the market's open. I've got a new plan." He hung up. Back at the table, Ruth was wrapping the scarf tighter around her shoulders. "You look like a man about to start trouble," she said with a knowing smile. Evan chuckled. "Maybe. The good kind." "What kind is that?" "The kind that keeps people from freezing." She gave him a long, appraising look. "Then don't just talk about it. Build it." He nodded slowly. "I think I will." Outside, the wind howled harder, but the decision settled in his chest like heat. He'd built algorithms to map weather, predict demand, move goods efficiently across states. But what if that same code could map warmth? Could reroute not shipments, but compassion? He looked down at Leo. "We've got work to do, kiddo." Leo tilted his head. "Like homework?" Evan smiled. "Something like that. But this time, everyone gets the answers." Ruth laughed softly, her voice a whisper over the storm. "Then make sure the first thing on that list is soup." He reached out, touched the old ladle's handle, and nodded. "Always." As dawn bled pale light through the frost, the three of them sat together. A tech magnate, a forgotten cook, and a boy who believed kindness could change the temperature of a city. Outside, Chicago was still buried in white. But somewhere deep beneath the snow, a new kind of warmth was beginning to stir. By mid-morning, the snow outside the station had turned to fine needles of ice that glittered under the pale winter sun. Traffic was frozen. Delivery trucks idled like stranded beasts along the avenues. Chicago felt suspended, the world on pause while the storm decided who could endure it. Evan stood near the entrance, coat collar turned up, speaking quietly into his phone. "No, I'm not flying out. Cancel the conference," he said. "Yes, I know the investors are waiting. Tell them this blizzard's showing us what the data never could." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, exhaling a long cloud of breath that vanished before him. Behind him, Leo was showing Ruth a snowflake he'd caught on his glove. She was smiling, real warmth now in her expression, though her hands still trembled. "You see how everyone's different?" Leo said. "Dad told me it's because even snow needs to be special." Ruth chuckled softly. "Sounds like your dad's a poet, not just a computer man." Evan turned, catching that, and smiled faintly. "I wish. Mostly I just read data too fast and forget the human parts." "Well," Ruth said, lifting her ladle like a baton, "seems like you're remembering now." He joined them at the folding table, resting a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You know, I was thinking about something last night," he said. "Every route Luminarch tracks, delivery trucks, emergency drones, they're all built to find efficiency. But what if we changed the objective?" Ruth looked up. "Changed it to what?" "To warmth," he said simply. "Not temperature, but connection. People who need food, shelter, or even just a knock on their door when the city shuts down." Ruth blinked. "You're serious?" Evan nodded. "Dead serious." He crouched a little so his eyes met Leo's. "Remember what Grandma used to say, buddy? That warmth isn't what you keep, it's what you give away?" Leo nodded. "She said it's like soup. If you share it, everyone gets full." Ruth let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Your mom must have been a saint." "She was a cook," Evan said quietly. "Worked 3 jobs to make sure I never went hungry. I guess I owe her more than I realized." He turned toward Ruth again. "What if we built something together? You have the heart, the experience. I've got the infrastructure. We could create something that finds the cold spots, literally and figuratively." Ruth frowned, skeptical but intrigued. "You mean a charity?" "No," Evan said. "Not charity. A system. One that works because it respects people, not just numbers. A network that connects kitchens, volunteers, and routes using the same AI we use for corporations. But this time, to deliver soup instead of shipments." Ruth's eyes glistened. "You're talking about feeding half the city." He smiled. "Why not start there?" Leo grinned wide. "Can I help?" Evan ruffled his son's hair. "You already did." They stayed at the station until the sun dipped again. Ruth insisted on helping the volunteers clean up, and by then, her steps were surer, her laughter easier. The ladle, her ladle, clinked against the pot with every movement, as though marking time for something new. When the last of the folding tables was stacked away, Evan walked her to the door. "You sure you'll be okay tonight?" he asked. "I'll manage," she said. "The shelter said they might have a spot by evening." He pressed a small card into her gloved hand. "If they don't, call this number. It's a direct line to my assistant. She'll make sure you've got a hotel room and a hot meal." Ruth stared at the card, stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because you reminded me I was raised by someone who fed strangers first and herself last," Evan said. "And because no algorithm in the world should have to tell me what's right." Her voice wavered. You're a good man, Mr. Mercer. He shook his head lightly. No, just one trying to be better. When Ruth stepped out into the wind, she turned back once. If you're serious about that system, she said, lifting her ladle, you'll need someone who knows soup. Evan smiled. I'll call you tomorrow. After she disappeared into the crowd, Evan stood in silence for a long while. Leo tugged at his sleeve. Dad, are we really going to make that soup thing? Evan knelt to meet his eyes. Yeah, buddy, we are. But it's not about soup, it's about warmth. The kind that keeps people alive. Leo thought for a second, then nodded. Then we should call it something warm. Evan chuckled. Like what? The boy grinned. Project Hearthline. Because a hearth is where the heat lives. Evan froze, the name settling in his mind like an ember finding kindling. He repeated it softly, tasting the words. Project Hearthline. By the time they reached the SUV, his decision was already made. The phone buzzed again. Messages, alerts, meetings. But for once, he didn't answer. He just looked at his son in the rearview mirror, red cheeks glowing, eyes full of quiet conviction. Outside, the blizzard raged on. But in Evan Mercer's world, the map of the city was already changing. Not with data points, but with people. And somewhere across Chicago, a woman named Ruth walked into the storm, a red scarf around her neck and a ladle clutched to her heart, whispering a prayer that this time warmth would find its way back. By the next morning, the city had gone silent under a white shroud. Plows crawled down half-buried streets, leaving gray ridges of ice behind them. From his office window, 30 floors up, Evan watched Chicago blink awake, 1,000 tiny lights against a wall of frost. His reflection in the glass looked back at him. Tailored shirt, tired eyes, coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ruth's trembling hands around that soup cup. And Leo's small voice saying, "She looks cold." He turned from the window. His office, once a kingdom of glass and order, now felt too sterile. Screens hummed with live data feeds, delivery routes, temperature readings, energy consumption charts. He stared at them, and for the first time he saw gaps. Gaps where the city's heat ended, but people still lived. A knock sounded. His assistant, Claire, stepped in with her usual composed smile. "Morning, Mr. Mercer. I've rescheduled the board meeting and—" "Cancel it," he said, cutting her off. Claire blinked. "All of it?" He nodded. "I'll meet with them after I finalize something." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "Sir, if I may, your investors are uneasy. Yesterday's cancellation already made headlines." Evan exhaled. "Let them be uneasy. Maybe they'll feel something for once." Claire studied him, then nodded slowly. She'd worked for him long enough to know when his tone meant change was coming. "All right. What should I tell them?" He looked back at the data wall, then said quietly, "Tell them Luminark is shifting priorities." "Shifting? How?" He turned to her. "From optimization to compassion." Her brows knit. "That's not a category on the balance sheet." He smiled faintly. "It's about to be." After she left, Evan called Trent, his COO. The man's voice came through sharp, impatient. "Evan, the markets are watching. You can't just reroute our systems overnight." "I'm not asking," Evan said. "We're deploying the Luminark routing network for something new. Project Hearthline." Trent groaned audibly. "You mean that charity idea you mentioned last night? Evan, we're not a non-profit." "No," Evan said firmly. "We're a company that claims to make life better, so let's prove it." He walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began sketching as he spoke. "We'll use our existing delivery algorithms, the ones tracking supply chains, but repurpose them. They'll find the coldest zones in the city based on power outages, traffic cameras, and temperature sensors. Then, we'll route volunteer kitchens and drivers directly there with hot meals and blankets." Trent was silent for a moment. "You're talking about a logistics system for compassion." "Exactly," Evan said. "A humanitarian network powered by data. Not profit. Trent sighed. You realize that'll cost millions to launch? I'll fund it myself, Evan said. You'll go broke saving the city, Evan. Then at least I'll sleep, he replied, hanging up before Trent could argue. For hours, he worked, calling engineers, data analysts, civic partners. The screens filled with maps pulsing red and blue, red for cold, blue for movement. Dots began to align. Shelters, community kitchens, underpasses where people sought refuge. He whispered to himself, "Come on. Make it work." By afternoon, the first test pinged back. A tiny van icon blinked on screen, rerouting around a closed bridge to reach a shelter on the south side. He leaned closer as the dashboard displayed its message. ETA. 12 minutes. Hot meals, 42. Evan smiled for the first time all day. When he finally stepped out of the office, the wind had eased, but the streets still glittered with snow. He drove straight to the Union Station shelter. Ruth was there, apron on, ladle in hand, directing volunteers like a seasoned commander. "You weren't kidding," she said when she saw him. "Half the city's calling about your project already. They say vans are showing up with food, blankets, heaters." He grinned. "Looks like the algorithm's working." Ruth wiped her hands on a towel. "You really built it." "With your help," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't build anything. I just stir soup." Evan leaned against the counter. "You do more than that, Ruth. You remind people warmth still exists." Her eyes softened. "You talk like a man who's finally thawing out." He chuckled. "Maybe I am." Just then, Leo burst in, cheeks red from the cold. "Dad, they said your app made the news. Everyone's calling it the warm map." Evan laughed. "That's one way to put it." Ruth smiled at Leo. "You proud of your dad, little one?" Leo shook his head. "I'm proud of you, Miss Ruth. Dad said you taught him how to make soup for people who need it." Her voice caught. "He said that." "Yup," Leo said, grinning. "He said every project needs a heart. And you're ours." Ruth's eyes brimmed instantly, but she blinked the tears back, muttering, "That boy's gonna melt me faster than this heater." Evan laughed softly, but his throat tightened. "He's right, though." She gestured toward the ladle in her hand. "Then let's keep it stirring, boss." That night, as the first fleet of AI-guided vans fanned out across Chicago, Evan stood beside Ruth in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, ladling soup into containers. Steam clouded his glasses, and he didn't bother wiping them clean. Outside, snow still fell. But this time, it wasn't the enemy. It was a canvas. The city roared back to life under frost and purpose. Sirens, engines, and laughter braided together into something almost musical. From the Luminarch Tower's control room, a network of screens shimmered with data, colored lines dancing across maps of Chicago, tracing delivery routes that pulsed like veins carrying heat through a frozen body. Evan stood in the center, jacket off, tie loosened, eyes fixed on the live dashboard. A banner across the top read, "Project Hearthline, active." "Unit 7 just cleared the West Side underpass," an engineer called. "That's 47 people with blankets and meals delivered." "Good," Evan said. "Keep monitoring battery levels on the vans. They can't stall out in this weather." He turned to another technician. "Run another overlay on temperature gradients. Any red zones left near Garfield Park?" The young man typed quickly. "A few small ones. We're sending drones with thermal packs." Evan nodded, the glow from the screens painting his face in flickers of blue and amber. The room buzzed around him. A team of coders, dispatchers, and volunteers all fused into motion. What had begun as an idea in the cold now pulsed with urgency. But amid the noise, his mind drifted back to Ruth. At Union Station, she'd transformed the shelter into a full kitchen. He could still hear her voice from earlier that morning. Sharp, commanding, alive. "Keep the broth thick, not watery. If it cools too fast, you'll lose them before they finish eating." She had a map of her own. Handwritten notes of neighborhoods she knew by name, streets where kids used to run after school before the snow claimed them. And through it all, her old ladle, that worn piece of steel marked calf 12. Never left her side. Evan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Leo. "Dad, Ruth says we need more carrots." He smiled, replying, "On it, chef." When he looked up, Claire stood at the doorway, tablet in hand. "You're trending worldwide," she said. "They're calling it the AI of compassion. You've got journalists requesting interviews, and the mayor's office just reached out. They want to help expand Hearthline citywide." Evan exhaled, rubbing his neck. "We'll take their help, but not their politics. This day's about people, not headlines." Claire hesitated. "You're changing the company's entire identity overnight. You realize that, right?" "I do," he said, "and maybe that's the point." She smiled faintly. "You sound more like your mother every day." That stopped him. "You knew my mom?" Claire nodded. "I grew up near South Shore. She used to hand out sandwiches to kids at the bus stop. Half of us didn't even know her name. We just called her the bread lady." Evan's throat tightened. She would have liked this project. "She'd be proud," Claire said quietly, before leaving him alone with the screens. Hours later, Evan drove through the snow-choked streets himself, following one of the Hearthline vans. He'd refused a security detail, insisting on seeing the system work in person. At every stop, he saw the same thing: hands reaching for warmth, eyes lighting up as steaming cups changed the color of the night. The last stop was a cul-de-sac near an abandoned church. A volunteer motioned him over. "We've got one more delivery. Ruth's leading this one." Evan followed the glow of lanterns down the icy walkway. Inside the church basement, Ruth stood surrounded by folding tables, steam rising around her like a halo. Volunteers moved with the rhythm she set, a conductor in an orchestra of care. "You're late," she teased without looking up. "Got caught in traffic," he said, grinning. "Traffic? In this storm? Guess hope's contagious." Ruth laughed, her voice echoing off the brick walls. "Then don't stand around. You're wasting soup time." He took the ladle she offered, their fingers brushing. It startled him, the warmth of her skin against the cold air. For a fleeting second he saw something deeper in her eyes: gratitude, strength, maybe even trust. They worked side by side until the pots ran dry. By the end, everyone was laughing, talking, clapping each other on the back. The chill in the air was still there, but it no longer mattered. When the last bowl was served, Ruth leaned against the counter, catching her breath. "You know," she said softly, "I thought I was finished. I thought my story ended when they closed the kitchen. Turns out, it just changed locations." Evan smiled. "You brought it back to life, Ruth. You gave this whole thing a heartbeat." She shook her head gently. "No, Evan, you did, when you decided data wasn't enough." He looked at her, eyes reflecting the flicker of a portable heater. "Then maybe we both did." She studied him for a long moment before saying, "Don't let them take this from you. The world's full of men who start things like this and forget why." "I won't," he said quietly. "I promise." Outside, the vans hummed away into the night, small beacons of light in the snow, carving paths of warmth through a city that had forgotten its own pulse. Ruth straightened, her ladle tapping the edge of the empty pot. "Well," she said with a grin, "looks like I'm back on shift." Evan laughed. "Good, because tomorrow we expand." Expand? Every neighborhood, every shelter. Hearthline isn't a project anymore, Ruth. It's a promise. For the first time in years, Evan Mercer felt something no algorithm had ever given him: peace. The next morning broke with a strange kind of brightness, one that didn't belong to the sun, but to motion, to purpose. Chicago had thawed just enough to breathe. Steam curled from sewer grates, rooftops glittered under the pale sky. Across the city, vans marked with Luminarc's logo, white against navy blue, a small golden flame beneath the word Hearthline, moved like lifelines through the streets. Inside one of those vans, Evan rode shotgun beside a driver named Ramon, a former delivery worker turned volunteer. The van's heater rattled, filling the cab with a low hum. On the dashboard, the tablet pulsed with real-time updates. Route 14B, completed. Route 14C, pending. "Never seen anything like this," Ramon said. "Usually it's every man for himself in a blizzard. But this, it's like the whole city's got the same heartbeat." Evan smiled faintly. "That's the idea." Ramon nodded. "You know the way folks talk about you now? You're some kind of legend. Tech billionaire turned soup man." Evan laughed under his breath. "I'll take that title any day." The van turned a corner and stopped in front of a small brick building, a community center long shuttered, its windows fogged with condensation. Outside, Ruth was standing near the door, bundled in her red scarf, organizing crates of vegetables with 3 volunteers. When she spotted Evan, she waved the ladle at him like a command. "You're late," she shouted through the wind. He grinned, stepping out. "We're right on schedule, chef." "Not if we want to feed the South Loop by noon," she shot back. Ramon unloaded boxes while Evan followed Ruth inside. The air was alive with sound. Clattering pots, sizzling oil, and the rhythmic chop of knives on cutting boards. Someone had written Hearthline Kitchen, South Hub in chalk above the entrance. "This used to be a youth rec center," Ruth said proudly. "Now it's our test kitchen. I told your team we're doing real food today, none of that powdered nonsense." He chuckled. "You outrank me here, Ruth." "Good," she said, smiling. "Means it's finally a democracy." She handed him a knife. "Dice those carrots. Even a CEO can do that." Evan rolled his sleeves and got to work beside her. They moved in quiet rhythm, the air fragrant with garlic and broth. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the stoves. It came from laughter, from the scrape of metal on wood, from people who hadn't given up on kindness. After an hour, Ruth leaned against the counter, watching the pot simmer. "You ever think," she said softly, "that maybe your son was the real start of all this?" Evan looked up, brow furrowed. "Leo?" "Yeah," she said. "He's the one who noticed me, the one who shared his scarf. You followed his lead." He paused, a smile forming. "You're right. I just built what he already understood." She chuckled. "Kids see what we forget to look at." At that moment, the kitchen door swung open. Leo bounded in, bundled up in a puffy coat, cheeks pink from the cold. "Dad," he called, "they said the mayor wants to talk to you on TV." Evan wiped his hands. "Oh? What for?" Leo grinned. "Because you're helping everybody." Ruth laughed. "He's not wrong. You've made quite the stir." Evan bent down to his son's level. "You ready to help today, too?" Leo nodded eagerly. "Ruth said I can hand out bread." "Then that's your station," Evan said with a grin. "Best job in the house." For the next few hours, the kitchen ran like a symphony. Ruth led the line, her ladle moving with a kind of sacred grace. Evan carried trays, refilled pots, even wiped down tables. And Leo, small, determined, smiling, handed out rolls of bread to everyone who walked in. Between deliveries, Evan's phone buzzed again. Calls from board members, investors, journalists. He ignored them all. For once, he didn't need numbers to tell him whether something was working. He could feel it in the faces around him. By sunset, the Hearthline network had served nearly 12,000 meals across Chicago. The city's major stations were warming centers, and even rival corporations had started contributing. Luminarc's logo, once a symbol of profit, had become something else entirely. When the last bowl was served, Ruth leaned against the counter, exhausted but smiling. "You did it," she said quietly. "You turned code into comfort." Evan shook his head. "We did it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You really think this can last?" He hesitated. "It has to. But we'll need more hands, more kitchens, more hearts like yours." Ruth's smile softened. "Then you'll have mine. Long as I can hold this ladle." He glanced at the engraving. CAF 12, catching the orange light. "I think it was waiting for this." Just then, Leo tugged his sleeve. "Dad, look!" Outside the frosted window, Dozens of people stood in the street holding lanterns. One of the volunteers had started lighting them, passing them down the line. The glow stretched all the way to the corner, bright against the snow. Ruth whispered, "It looks like hope." Evan rested a hand on her shoulder. "No," he said softly. "It is hope." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, watching the light move through the winter air. And for the first time since he'd founded Luminark, Evan Mercer didn't see a company. He saw a city, alive, breathing, and warm again. The next day, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, sharp and white against the snow-packed streets. The city still groaned under the weight of winter, but something had shifted, an undercurrent of movement, of hands helping hands. In the Luminark boardroom, the mood was less forgiving. A dozen executives sat around a long walnut table, the skyline behind them a frozen maze of glass and smoke. Suits, silk ties, tension so thick it hummed under the fluorescent lights. Evan stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, expression calm but unflinching. On the screen behind him, Hearthline's dashboard glowed. Routes, kitchens, heat maps, all alive with motion. Trent, his COO, leaned back in his chair. "Evan, you're burning cash at an unsustainable rate. Our corporate clients are furious. We lost 3 logistics contracts this week alone." "I know," Evan said evenly, "and I'd lose 3 more if that's the cost of doing something right." An investor near the window scoffed. "Doing something right? You've turned a billion-dollar AI company into a soup kitchen network." A ripple of murmurs followed. Evan crossed his arms. "If that's what it takes to make our technology mean something, then yes. Call it what you want." Claire, his assistant, stood in the corner, tablet in hand. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice steady, "public approval is up 30%. We've never had this level of engagement. Every news outlet in the Midwest is covering Hearthline." Trent groaned. "Engagement doesn't pay the bills." Evan turned toward him. "Neither does apathy." The room went still. He walked closer to the screen, pointing to the glowing dots scattered across the map. "Do you see this? These aren't numbers. These are people. Families. Seniors who'd have frozen last night if not for those vans." An older board member spoke up, his tone cautious. "Evan, we respect your passion, but this humanitarian shift isn't scalable. You built Luminark on innovation. Investors want returns." Evan faced him squarely. Innovation isn't about returns. It's about relevance. If our systems can predict consumer demand but can't detect human suffering, then they're just noise. Trent slammed a hand on the table. "And when your philanthropy bankrupts us, what happens then?" Evan's voice softened, but didn't waver. "Then at least I'll know we tried to make something worth remembering." For a long beat, no one spoke. The air vibrated with unspoken challenge. Finally, Claire stepped forward. "Gentlemen," she said, eyes narrowing slightly, "before we decide what's unsustainable, perhaps you should see what it's sustaining." She tapped the tablet. The screen behind Evan flickered to life with live footage. Kitchens bustling, volunteers serving soup, children wrapped in blankets, elderly couples smiling at van doors. The city, alive and warm. Ruth's face appeared next. Ladle in hand, calling orders, laughter echoing behind her. The boardroom fell silent. "Her name's Ruth Callahan," Evan said quietly. "She used to be a cafeteria cook until automation replaced her, the same kind of algorithms we built. And now, she's running one of our most efficient kitchens." The older board member frowned. "That woman works for us?" "She leads for us," Evan corrected. "Without her, this entire system doesn't function." He turned to the room, voice steady but carrying a tremor of emotion. "Gentlemen, this company was founded on intelligence, artificial or otherwise. But real intelligence means empathy. Real progress means humanity. Hearthline isn't a detour. It's what we should have been doing all along." No one moved. Even Trent seemed lost for words. Then Claire spoke softly. You wanted a measurable result. Here's one. Since last night, not a single cold-related death has been reported within the Hearthline coverage zones. The room stayed still. The only sound, the faint hum of the heater. Evan glanced at his watch, then at the window where sunlight glared off the ice below. "I'm late for a kitchen shift," he said, gathering his coat. "If you want to fire me, file the papers before sunset." And with that, he left. Downstairs, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and salt from melting snow. Outside, volunteers were loading vans, their laughter cutting through the cold. When Evan stepped onto the street, he spotted a familiar figure by the curb. Ruth, scarf tucked tight, ladle sticking out of her canvas tote like a flag. "You look like a man who just survived a battlefield," she said with a grin. He chuckled. "Board meeting." "Close enough." She handed him a steaming cup. "Breakfast. You've earned it." He took a sip. "This is good. What is it?" "Potato soup," she said proudly. "Thick, the way my kids liked it. We're calling it the Hearthline Special." He smiled. "Has a nice ring to it." Ruth tilted her head. "So, what now? You win them over?" Evan laughed. "Not yet, but the city's starting to believe. And sometimes that's louder than shareholders." She tapped the ladle against his arm. "Then keep listening to the city." "I will," he promised. A gust of wind swept between them, but it carried warmth now. Laughter, the scent of soup, the hum of something bigger than both of them. He looked at her, eyes soft. "You know, Ruth, if my mom were here, she'd tell me to stay close to people like you." She smiled. Then she had good sense. As the van doors slammed shut behind them, Evan glanced back toward the Luminarch Tower, its mirrored surface reflecting the sun, brighter now than ever before. For the first time in his career, he wasn't chasing light. He was part of it. Night fell early again, but this time it wasn't the same Chicago. The storm had softened into a hush, and the city glowed with patches of amber light where Hearthline vans moved through the streets like patient constellations. News choppers hovered high above, filming the miracle of motion below, lines of warmth cutting through the cold. Evan stood outside one of the new satellite kitchens, an old library on the south side, now converted into a hub for deliveries. The sign above the entrance read, "Hearthline Central, keeping Chicago warm." Inside, the air shimmered with steam and noise. Ruth's voice carried above the chaos. "Table 3, 20 cups of lentil, and don't water it down. People need thick." Evan smiled as he walked in. She was in her element again, sleeves rolled, hair tucked behind her ears, the calf 12-oud ladle twirling in her grip like a baton. Volunteers obeyed every word without question. "Evening, Chef Callahan," he teased. She spun around. "About time you showed up, boss." "I had a detour," he said, hanging his coat. "Stopped by the North Hub. They've already served 4,000 meals." Ruth blinked. 4,000? He nodded. "And they said to tell you your recipe's too good. Nobody wants to stop eating." She laughed, a bright sound cutting through the roar of boiling pots. "Then I'll take that as success." Evan grabbed an apron. "Where do you need me?" "Line 2, she said, pointing with her ladle. "And don't think I won't check your portions." He joined the team at the counter, pouring soup into containers, sealing lids. Around him, the kitchen thrummed with energy. A teenager washing trays while humming. An elderly man folding blankets by the heater. A group of college volunteers coding temperature data on a laptop between ladle shifts. It felt alive. Alive in a way Luminarch's glass offices never did. Across the room, Leo was standing on a crate, handing out bread rolls like medals. "1 per person," he declared, his voice proud. "And 2 if you smile." Everyone laughed. Even Ruth wiped a tear. "That boy's gonna run the city one day," she said softly. Evan glanced over. "He already runs me." Ruth leaned against the counter. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" He looked at her curious. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, stirring the pot, "one day the storm will end. The streets will clear. People will go back to work, to routine. What happens to Hearthline then? Evan's expression turned thoughtful. Then it becomes the new routine. Warmth shouldn't depend on disaster. Ruth smiled faintly. You really believe that? I do, he said, and I think it starts here. Kitchens like this, people like you. She looked down at her ladle, fingers tracing the engraving. You know, when they shut down the cafeteria, I thought I'd lost my purpose, but tonight, I feel like I got it back. Evan's voice softened. You never lost it, Ruth. You just needed a map to find it again. She met his eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them, deeper than gratitude, warmer than friendship. Before either could say more, Claire burst through the door, breathless from the cold. Evan, the mayor's office just called again. They're asking if you'll attend a press event tomorrow. They want to officially recognize Hearthline as a citywide initiative. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. You're getting medals now? Evan shook his head. If they want to celebrate something, they can start by visiting these kitchens. Claire grinned. That's exactly what I told them. The mayor's coming here at noon. Ruth froze mid-stir. Here? Oh, Lord, I need to clean these counters. Evan laughed. You mean the same counters you polish twice an hour? Presentation matters, she shot back, waving her ladle. Leo piped up from the corner. Does that mean the mayor gets soup too? Only if he says please, Ruth replied, smiling. The kitchen erupted in laughter. Hours passed. The final deliveries went out under flurries of snow, and the once chaotic hub fell into a steady, sleepy rhythm. Ruth wiped down the counters while Evan checked the latest dashboard numbers on his phone. The map pulsed blue, every route active, every driver accounted for. Ruth looked over his shoulder. You realize you've done it, right? He nodded slowly. We've done it, but it's just the beginning. She watched him for a long moment. You know, you could have stopped after that night at the station. Most people would have written a check and walked away. He met her gaze. Most people haven't met you. She smiled, a quiet, disbelieving smile that seemed to carry the weight of every frozen night she'd survived. Get some rest, Ruth, he said softly. Tomorrow's a big day. I will, she said, slipping off her apron. But you, don't forget to eat. He lifted the ladle she left on the counter, still warm from the pot. I've got soup, he said, smiling. That's enough. As she walked out into the snow, the red scarf fluttered in the streetlight, the same one Leo had given her days ago. Evan watched until she vanished around the corner. Then he turned back to the kitchen, the soft hum of heaters, the glow of lanterns, the echo of laughter, and whispered to himself, Mom, we did it. Outside, the wind swept across the city again, but this time it carried warmth. The morning came crisp and bright, sunlight bouncing off the snowbanks like shards of glass. Chicago looked almost peaceful, wounded but alive. Inside the converted library that now served as Hearthline Central, volunteers moved quickly to prepare for the mayor's visit. The air was thick with steam, the smell of onions and broth cutting through the cold. Ruth barked orders like an orchestra conductor. Keep those cups full, no drips on the counter, and somebody find me that new box of bread. Leo, not that one, honey, the one that's not frozen solid. Evan stood nearby, jacket off, rolling up his sleeves. He was sealing containers at the prep line, looking more like a community worker than the CEO of one of the city's biggest tech firms. Claire entered, phone in hand, her breath visible in the chill. Media's already set up outside, she said. Mayor's ETA, 15 minutes. 15? Ruth repeated, half panicked. I've got soup stains older than that. We're not ready. Evan chuckled. You're more ready than you think. Ruth fixed him with a glare. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one whose ladle's going viral. He smiled. Actually, you are. The photo of you from last night, steam rising, ladle, mid-air, front page of the Tribune. Ruth froze. You're kidding. Claire held up her phone, showing the headline. The ladle that fed a city. Project Hearthline brings warmth to Chicago. Ruth blinked at it. That's me? Evan nodded, voice soft. That's you, the city's face of hope. Her laugh came out like disbelief and gratitude mixed together. Lord, if my mother could see this. Then she'd be proud, Evan said. You didn't just cook soup, Ruth. You reminded people what compassion looks like. The door opened then, letting in a blast of cold and a rush of camera shutters. The mayor, flanked by aides and press, stepped inside. Mr. Mercer, he called, extending a gloved hand. Quite the operation you've built here. Evan shook his hand firmly. Not just me. Ruth Callahan here runs the kitchens. Without her, none of this works. All eyes turned to Ruth, who suddenly looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Oh, welcome, sir, she stammered. Sorry about the mess. It's busy. The mayor smiled warmly. It's the best kind of mess. He moved through the kitchen, shaking hands, complimenting volunteers, posing for photos. The reporters crowded near the stoves, microphones raised, the air buzzing with questions. Mr. Mercer, is Hearthline staying beyond the blizzard? How are you funding this expansion? Do you plan to take it national? Evan lifted his hands for quiet. We're not here for headlines, he said calmly. We're here because last week, a woman nearly froze outside Union Station. A child gave her a scarf, and that moment changed everything. Hearthline isn't a campaign, it's a commitment. A hush fell over the room. Even the cameras paused. He continued, voice lower but steady. We built technology to move goods faster, but somewhere along the way we forgot the people waiting on the other end. That ends today. From now on, Luminarch's mission is simple: intelligence that keeps people warm. Applause filled the room. Volunteers, reporters, even the mayor himself. Ruth watched him, eyes glistening. The boy who'd given her his scarf stood beside his father, small but certain, smiling as though he knew this moment belonged to all of them. When the press conference ended, Evan ducked away from the cameras and found Ruth at the back counter, wiping her hands on a towel. You handled that like a pro, he teased. She laughed softly. I'm still shaking. I was a lunch lady last month. Now I'm giving speeches to politicians. You were always more than a lunch lady, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You could have let me fade away. Most people do, but you didn't. He smiled. Because you didn't let yourself. Ruth studied him, his hair mussed from the heat, sleeves rolled, a streak of flour on his cuff. You're not like most men with money, she said. You listen. Evan met her gaze. Maybe I just needed the right teacher. Their silence said what neither dared to. Something had shifted between them. Something simple, real, unspoken. Just then, Leo ran up with a cup in each hand. Dad! Ruth! We saved the last bowls for you. Ruth smiled, taking hers. You're spoiling me, Leo. It's the Hearthline rule, the boy said proudly. No one goes home hungry, not even heroes. She chuckled, glancing at Evan. That one's going to change the world someday. Evan raised his cup. To warmth, he said. To warmth, Ruth echoed. The soup was simple, potato, carrot, thyme, but as they stood together in that bustling kitchen, it tasted like victory. Outside, the crowd began to disperse, the storm finally yielding. But inside, the air glowed with something stronger than sunlight. Human warmth, stubborn and bright. And as Ruth hung her ladle back on the hook, Evan glanced at it and smiled. Calf 12. Worn and glinting under the lights. The last remnant of her old life, now the emblem of a new one. He turned to her. You ready to build the next kitchen? Ruth's grin spread slow and sure. Only if you promise to keep peeling carrots. Evan laughed. Deal. Outside, the city stretched toward morning, and the line for soup never stopped. 2 weeks later, the city was almost unrecognizable. Where there had once been silence and frostbite, there was now motion, chatter, and warmth. The snow still lay thick in the alleys, but every night its edges softened beneath the light of lanterns and the hum of Hearthline vans. The project had grown beyond anything Evan imagined. There were now 7 active hubs, each led by volunteers Ruth had trained herself, retired cooks, parents, even a few former shelter guests. Every kitchen carried her fingerprint, the same handwritten recipe cards taped above the counters, the same phrase scrawled in red ink on every wall. Warmth isn't a number. That morning, Evan drove across town with Leo in the passenger seat. The streets glistened under a pale blue sky, steam rising from manholes like faint smoke signals. "Dad?" Leo asked, munching on a piece of bread from his lunchbox. "Are we going to make soup forever?" Evan smiled. "Maybe not forever, but as long as people are cold, we'll keep it going." Leo nodded solemnly. "Then I'll help when I'm big. I'll drive the trucks." Evan laughed softly. "I think you already do more than that." When they reached the new Hearthline hub on 63rd, Ruth was outside, bundled in her red scarf, helping volunteers unload crates of fresh vegetables. She waved as they pulled up. "Morning, Mercer men," she called. "You're just in time. The new stove came in, and I'm not letting anyone near it till you see it." Evan got out, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Another donation." "Anonymous," Ruth said with a wink. "But I got a feeling it came from someone who knows a good soup pot when he sees one." Leo ran ahead, tugging on Ruth's sleeve. "Miss Ruth, look what I made." He held up a crayon drawing, a pot of soup under a big red heart, 3 stick figures holding spoons. "That's you, me, and Dad." Ruth bent down, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You made this for me?" Leo nodded proudly. "You said kitchens need hearts, so I drew one." She smiled, pressing the drawing to her chest. "I'll frame it," she said softly. "Promise." Evan watched, quiet, his throat tightening. There were moments money couldn't buy. Moments like this, when love and purpose blended so seamlessly he couldn't tell them apart. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with life. New volunteers worked the line. A young woman named Jasmine, once homeless herself, now led the prep team. Ruth moved from station to station, her ladle tapping rhythmically against the pot as she coached them. "Not too much salt, sweetheart. Let the carrots speak for themselves," she said. Evan leaned against the counter, watching her work. The way she commanded the room reminded him of conductors he'd seen in concert halls, every motion deliberate, every voice attuned to hers. "Hard to believe," he said. "You were afraid to walk inside that first night?" Ruth glanced at him, smiling faintly. "Hard to believe you almost didn't notice me." He met her gaze, the air thickening between them for just a heartbeat. "I notice now." She looked away quickly, stirring the pot, her cheeks flushing faintly from more than heat. Just then, Claire entered with a clipboard. "Evan, I've got good news. City Council approved permanent permits for Hearthline operations. You're officially a recognized humanitarian network." Ruth gasped. "You mean we're legit?" Evan nodded, grinning. "We're legit," Claire added. "And there's more. A foundation in New York wants to replicate the model. They want you to consult." Ruth froze. "New York? You mean me?" Evan smiled. "They want the woman who turned a ladle into a revolution." Ruth laughed through disbelief. "Oh, Lord, I don't even own a suitcase." "I'll buy you one," he said quietly. She met his eyes again, softer this time. "Careful, Mr. Mercer. You keep this up. I might start believing you need me." He smiled. "I already do." The room went still around them, the hum of activity fading into the background. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Leo, oblivious, piped up, "Dad, can I show Ruth the new map?" Evan blinked, clearing his throat. "Sure, buddy." Leo held up a printed chart, color-coded routes, dotted lines stretching across Chicago. "See? Each blue line means soup. Each red dot is a kitchen." Ruth leaned over. "Looks like a heart," she said. Evan smiled. "It does, doesn't it?" Later that evening, after the last shift ended, Ruth walked with Evan outside. The snow had started again, gentle, whispering. The streets glowed under streetlights, soft halos reflecting in puddles. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to hate snow. It reminded me of everything I lost. But now—" He waited. She smiled faintly. "Now it reminds me of soup, of second chances." He looked at her, his voice low. "You gave me one too." They stood there in silence, two silhouettes against a city reborn from ice. Then, without a word, Ruth reached into her tote and handed him something. The ladle and a calf 12. Polished clean. "You keep it tonight," she said. "Every kitchen needs a reminder of where it started." Evan held it gently, the metal warm from her hand. "You sure?" She nodded. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything. Don't ever forget that the first miracle wasn't the AI or the vans. It was a kid with a scarf." He smiled. "I couldn't forget if I tried." She laughed softly, pulling her scarf tighter. "Then you'll be fine." As she walked away into the drifting snow, Evan stood there a long time, the ladle gleaming in his hand. Above him, a banner flapped from the Hearthline sign. Technology that keeps people warm. And for the first time in years, he felt truly home. A month later, winter began to loosen its grip. The nights were still cold, but the air no longer bit. It breathed. Snowmelt trickled through the gutters, carrying away the last traces of a city that had once frozen to silence. The Hearthline kitchens, though, stayed open. What began as crisis relief had become something permanent, a living network stitched together by compassion and code. Across Chicago, families came not just for warmth, but for belonging. At Union Station, the place where it all began, Evan stood by the wide glass doors, watching people move in and out of the shelter-turned community center. The once empty benches were filled with laughter, the smell of soup and bread hanging in the air. Behind him, Ruth stirred a massive pot on the portable stove. Her red scarf was faded now, but still bright against the gray of her coat. She hummed softly, a tune that sounded like something from a church kitchen decades ago. Leo sat at a table nearby, drawing with a cluster of other kids. His latest creation was taped to the wall beside Ruth's cooking station, a giant, heart-shaped soup pot with steam forming the words, "Thank you." Evan turned, smiling. "You've started a tradition, Ruth. You realize that, right?" She shrugged, eyes twinkling. "It's not me, it's them. Once people remember how good it feels to help, they don't stop." He stepped closer. "Still, you made them remember." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "You sound like a man who's trying to give away all the credit again." He grinned. "Maybe I am." Just then, Claire entered with her usual efficiency, carrying a stack of papers. "Final reports are in," she said. "You might want to see this." Evan skimmed through the sheets. Each line told the story better than any headline could. 0 cold-related deaths in the city this month. 72,000 meals served. 380 volunteers active. 14 new kitchens planned. He exhaled slowly. "We actually did it." Ruth leaned on the counter smiling. "No, you did it. You and that little boy of yours." Evan's eyes softened. "He's been talking about expanding to Milwaukee next." She laughed. "Then I'd better start peeling twice the potatoes." The crowd in the kitchen began to grow as lunchtime approached. Volunteers carried steaming trays to waiting tables, voices rising in rhythm. Evan watched Ruth weave through the noise, steady, unhurried, her ladle moving with grace. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. The calf 12. Ladle, polished, the engraving now gleaming in the light. "Ruth!" he called. She turned. He held it out to her. "This belongs back where it started." Her eyes widened. "You kept it?" "Always," he said. "But it's yours. You earned it 10 times over." Ruth took it carefully, her hands trembling. "It feels heavier than before." "That's because it's carrying a city now," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You really do have a way with words, don't you?" He smiled. "You gave me the right ones." From across the room, Leo called out, "Dad!" Come see. Evan and Ruth followed him to the far wall, where volunteers had hung a framed plaque above the children's drawings. The engraving read, "In memory of every hand that shared its warmth. Project Hearthline. Founded here, Union Station, January." Underneath, someone had taped a small photo. Ruth, ladle in hand, laughing beside Evan and Leo. Ruth wiped her eyes. "Well, would you look at that? Immortalized with soup stains and all." Leo smiled. "Miss Ruth, that's my favorite picture." "Mine too, sweetheart." Outside, snowflakes began to fall again. Not sharp or cruel this time, but soft, almost ceremonial. People passing by the windows paused to watch, smiling. Evan turned to Ruth. "Seems winter isn't quite done with us." She nodded. "Then neither are we." He reached into his coat pocket again and handed her something small, a folded piece of paper, slightly creased. "What's this?" she asked. "Blueprints," he said. "For the next Hearthline kitchen. I was thinking we'd name it after you." Her jaw dropped. "Evan, no, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently, "because this started with your heart. Let the city remember that." For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she pressed the paper against her chest. "You sure know how to make a woman cry on the job." He smiled. "I'll take that as approval." She laughed through the tears. "All right then. One more kitchen, maybe two." Leo tugged Ruth's sleeve. "Can I help name it?" "Of course," she said. "What do you have in mind?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "The warm room, because everyone deserves one." Ruth looked at Evan, eyes shining. "Smart kid." Evan nodded. "Gets it from his grandmother." The three of them stood together, framed by the light streaming through the tall glass doors. Ruth's scarf fluttered as another gust of wind pushed against the station, but inside the air was steady and alive. Evan bent down, tying Leo's scarf a little tighter. "You started this, kiddo." Leo beamed. "We all did." Ruth lifted her ladle, grinning. "Then here's to keeping it going." And as she dipped it into the pot, the scent of soup filled the room once more, not just food, but a reminder that warmth, once shared, never truly fades. Outside, the city glowed against the snowfall, a skyline no longer cold, but human again, a child's kindness, a father's awakening, and a cook's ladle that carried a promise: to keep the world warm, one bowl at a time.